Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now it's that time where we are redoing our rankings. So the first video of the series was 2020 champions released so far ranked. Then I decided to re-rank 2021 champions because obviously when the first set of rankings was finished, many of those champions were absolutely fresh, and in many cases, you know, they just needed a bit of time to prove themselves and switch that up. You can see the old 2021 rankings on the side. So today we're going to be finishing that up with the top 12 champions of 2021 in my personal opinion. Then we're going to rank all MCOC classes, do the class top 10s, top MCOC champions in general, where all of these classes are going to be combined, and then we're going to do tier list updates. So this is quite extensive list of videos here. So here is the old list, and you're going to immediately notice that a lot of champions are quite undeservedly low. For instance, I have definitely changed my opinion about Cersei. AntiVenom has improved his position, and several other champions. Obviously, few champions have to go down as well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think any worse of those champions now than I did at the time. It's just that how much a lot of champions how kind of proved themselves by now. And as you can see, we finished with spot 12 of Silver Centurion, and he actually regained his exact placement there as well, because I think he's a perfect benchmark. And everybody above Silver Centurion, so everybody in this video, is already going to be an excellent champion that is, in my opinion, well worth the rank up resources, that can be the best or one of the best options in plenty of different scenarios. And that is a very good indicator of 2021 actually having been a good year for the champions. Yeah, we had our Super Scrolls, we had our Psychomans and stuff like that, and Purgatories, but most of the champions definitely have plenty to offer to the contest. And we're going to start off perhaps somewhat controversially, because this is going to be probably the biggest downslide of a single champion. But again, it's not necessarily because I think much less or any less of Scarlet Witch Sigil. It's just that my impression of many other champions has increased. I still think Scarlet Witch is crazy good champion. Also one of the most fun champions. And she has already had the time to put in some work in the game, as more and more people acquire her, now that some free-to-play players have had a chance to grind for a 5 and 6 star as well. She's definitely a very good mystic. She really is. At the same time, when push comes to shove, we don't see her that much in these most competitive game modes where you can't afford yourself a bit of a risk. Because with that entire mechanic where she does need to learn her parries to nullify opponents' buffs, and then, you know, the option of them going unblockable, it just can mess you over. At the same time, she's also a very scary defender, pretty much because of it, because she gives you buffs by herself, and then they expire eventually, and then she feeds her Mystic Dispersion, and then she spams more special attacks. So she's, and again, in my opinion, a champion that's well worth ranking, that I personally have had, you know, the privilege, the pleasure to use and enjoy. And she can do some very, very impressive things. I do not think she's like a bad mystic at all. Again, at the same time, it does seem that it is quite unlikely for her to break into that very top echelon of the champions in the game. For a big reason that there is some risk into running her. Like, it might not be that obvious, and initially I myself thought, you know, I'm just going to be careful. I'm going to pay attention to what buffs opponents have. But even I have to admit that I get hit in the face more often playing Scarlet Witch than other champions. And there is a reason for that. She's not an easy champion to handle, and there will always be those situations when you're prepared to parry and all of a sudden, you know, those buffs activate, and then there's that unblockability and so on and so forth. Still, amazing champion, well worth the rank up. Absolutely love the Scarlet Witch. I'm going to move on to spot number 11, and spot number 11 is going to be a quite big jump here as well for AntiVenom, because previously I placed him in spot number 15, and AntiVenom was one of those cases that kind of get quite overlooked because he came out, I believe, together with Null. Was it Null? I think it was Null. And you know, one champion got all the attention, this one didn't. He didn't have the most stellar reviews. But then as more and more content gets released, it turns out he's better for more and more stuff. That's one of the reasons why I always like when Kabam does these extreme challenge modes with these conditions. And I think for me, the real eye-opener personally to AntiVenom was when I brought him in Abyss. So I ended up maxing out my 5-star, bringing him in Abyss. And then I started, using him more, messing around with him more, discovering some different rotations, which actually do kind of cover a lot of weaknesses that initially we thought AntiVenom has. For instance, that longer ramp up. If you do follow kind of like a fairly specific hit combo count, which includes landing a couple of heavy attacks, full combo, and then dropping your level 1 at like 9 hits mark, then you can ramp him up very, very quickly because you can get all the 4 debuffs up before 20 hits or at 20 hit mark. So that is a quick ramp up actually. But all of that doesn't help his biggest drawback. Now, if AntiVenom didn't have this downside, I have no doubt he would be much, much, much higher, and he would be kind of like a mainstream, one of the top science champions. And the drawback is the level 2. He does have a ton of utility. Nobody can take that away from him. And he does have potential for some very good damage output. He can't do both. And this might be kind of like a spoiled perspective, but in this game, in 2022, we have a ton of champions who do have both. So whenever we are forced, whether you want to access champion utility or do you want to have the damage, most people just don't make that choice. They say, I'm going to do neither, and I'm going to pick a different champion, and I'm going to do both at the same time, and I'm not going to have to worry about any of that stuff. That is the problem of AntiVenom. On the flip side, there is that much of that utility, his ability to take, shots and block thanks to his SIG level, especially if it's high SIG level. Then obviously heal reversal, power gain, the deaccelerate to deal with evades and unstoppables. There's a lot there. Double immunities as well to incinerate and poison. He's a very, very potent champion with a very unfortunate problem that unfortunately cannot be worked around. So I see where potentially, he might still increase in popularity despite all of that. But I doubt that he's going to ever again be the very top champion. Because that choice ultimately is the devil's bargain. Whenever you are forced to make that choice, typically already means that the champion has a limit. And you don't have to. You can just move away. At the same time, definitely the guy has been putting in work in more and more content. As, perhaps not the quickest clearer, still very capable and powerful. Right, moving on to spot number 10, and this one is again another kind of huge leap forwards. Cersei. Now, when Cersei came out, she definitely didn't kind of create any massive waves. But I think part of it was because her damage was underrated. And her damage was underrated with the idea that, it is very hard to get to those 15 Fury buffs and, maintaining them, and it's kind of like a tricky thing. Turns out you don't have to, get 9, 10 Fury stacks, and that's it. You don't need any more. She's going to still hit very, very hard. You're just doing yourself a massive disservice by trying to get the very last inch of damage out of her. So she does have a good damage. Obviously, primarily she's a defender, because with her glancing, and then if she's awakened with her regen, she's just incredibly tricky to take down. And then when you end up fighting her, you need to be aware that her specials can, be unblockable. Sometimes they won't be unblockable. Then if you do get caught by a special attack, you can get stunned. Also, obviously, with the glancing triggers, none of your abilities really work. So she's very, very hard to fight. She's one of the toughest Battlegrounds defenders as well. Won so many matches using Cersei. Obviously, as she's getting more popular, as with every champion, people are learning how to play around her. But the cool thing about Cersei is that I do think she has a lot of offensive potential as well. Like that ability that everybody is praising about Captain America Sam Wilson and Proxima Midnight. Cersei has that too. It's just that people didn't realize it initially. Where if you have your glancing buff active, virtually none of the abilities will work when you're blocking or parrying. So when you have your glancing buff active, She disables masochism. She disables hard knock life. She disables all of the individual champion abilities and nodes that activate on the contact whenever you have that glancing buff active. And you can have very high uptime for that glancing buff. Then on top of that, just like additional neat utility bits like the reduction of the shocks, incinerates, heal blocks, and bleeds is very useful as well. And your ability to throw unblockable special attacks, slight power gain, all of that adds up into a very, very potent champion. And I haven't seen anybody actually speak about that level 3, because in any kind of like medium to longer fight, that special 3 is an absolute killer, because it does get the attack bonus from all the Furies that are active. And if you manage to drop a level 2 and then get to level 3, tons of damage right there. And perhaps another underrated ability of Cersei is that healing. On your last hit, apart from opponent, regenerate 5% of the damage dealt, consume all transformation buffs, and additional 3% for each transformation buff consumed. Thanks to that level 2, you can easily recover often like half of your health bar with a good level 2. It does require a bit of build up. It is going to be your second level 2 in a fight typically, but the regen is also absolutely crazy, which I love. One of my favorite incursion champions as well, by the way. So yeah, I do think Cersei is quite awesome. And who knows, maybe she's going to get even more popular in the future. Right, now that I have done sucking out the Cersei, another champion that moved slightly up, and my impression of Penny Parker has definitely grown as well, just because I was kind of forced to start using her more offensively as well, in Battleground specifically. And ever since then, I just enjoy the champion more and more, because she is quite awesome. She does have quite decent power control with her level 1s and level 3s once you have kind of built her up, and obviously then all the damage tied to level 2. Now the downside is that her damage is in fact absolutely incinerate reliant, which kind of also works to diminish that incinerate immunity, because in many matches where you need incinerate immunity, you need to also do damage that's not reliant on incinerate, and she doesn't do that. So that can get quite messy and unfortunately slightly limit her offensive options. But, added safety and damage mitigation with that Sync Shield, and then her immunities to Incinerate and Poison, obviously quite awesome. And she's a very potent nuke option in a ton of fights. And yeah, obviously her party trick at the moment is, if she's awakened, she can completely bypass Nick Fury's second life. And it just happened to be the perfect ability for Battlegrounds as well, because Nick Fury is known to be pretty much the toughest defender in Battlegrounds, or one of the toughest defenders. And one of my favorite things to do in Battlegrounds was to take up Penny, fairly early. And opponents obviously are preparing counters for Penny. And then you just flip the script on your opposing player, use Penny to kill their Nick Fury, and then they are left with another attacker that might not have a great matchup for. One of the reasons why I like Battlegrounds so much is because you can kind of play mind games with your opponent. And Penny is kind of like a perfect character because she's very lethal offensively and also very lethal defensively. So love that champion, and definitely have improved my opinion of her in general. All right, moving on to the next one. Another champion that has moved up in the rankings is Overseer. So Overseer is going to be spot number 8. And what can I say about it? As much as I dislike everything about the character module, hipster maestro sitting in Starbucks with flip-flops and man bun writing the latest screenplay where he complains how broke he is while drinking $15 latte frappuccino. That is what Overseer is, the way I look at him. At the same time, the dude's a beast. And again, Battlegrounds was definitely an eye-opener for a ton of people how amazing this champion is. His immunity to Nullify obviously serves extremely well against Power Snack and Buffet. His secondary damage sources when he's in his Cosmic mode serves to bypass all sorts of damage mitigations and, safeguards and whatever else you have. Then just, his natural immunity to Poison obviously serves as well, enabling him to be an option for many matchups that are quite popular across the game. And access to Disorient. Again, what's not to like about that one? Energize buff, awesome. Stun, some regen, and auto block for safety, and he also works as a decently potent defender. So the man is just kind of like somewhat understated utility powerhouse machine that just does a lot of work. And I am so happy for the guy that he's kind of finding his groove in the contest. We see more and more people ranking him up. There was a very good chance that this was going to be my first science rank 4. He would have been my first science rank 4 had I pulled the science rank gem as well. Man, the guy's awesome. I like him. And he's definitely, again, just understatedly putting in work in the background and earning respect of more and more players. That's all I'm going to say about Orza. And moving on to spot number 7. Spot number 7, I have slightly demoted Null. And don't get me wrong, I think Null's awesome. I do. It's not necessarily a champion specifically for me, that ramp-up process and then entering the corruption. I realized in Abyss, Null is not my type of champion, where you need to spend a significant portion of the fight ramping him up if you want access kind of like massive damage potential. And then you obviously can make the decision to enter your corruption earlier, but then you kind of limit your max ramp up, or at least make it kind of harder. At the same time, without having, you know, absolute mega ton of abilities, he does have everything that's needed for him to work. Combat power rate reduction enables him to be more aggressive, thus he works better as, you know, huge damage dealing option. The fact that he takes less damage from bleed, poison, degeneration makes him Liquid Courage double-edged friendly. A cosmic champion that doesn't rely on buffs is also fairly rare, so that gives him additional kind of niche in itself. Ease, he applies debuffs on opponents, and armor breaks obviously, again, makes him a great option for certain different matchups. And I understand that there are some people who are very critical of Null and say that he's like super overrated. I really don't think so. Because again, as I always say, a champion does not need to do 50 things to be good in MCOC. A champion needs to do a couple of things, or even one thing, but really well. And that's kind of like the thing with Null. Whatever he does do, he does very, very well, you know? Very compatible with Liquid Courage double edge masteries. If you need to bypass evade, sure, you know, just rely on your heavy attacks and mediums and opponents and never evade or auto block. And on top of it, he has additional avenues for healing. He does do some degeneration and bleed damage, but it's not like it's that big of a deal, so you can easily deal with any matchups where those immunities show up. You know, obviously armor breaks are kind of like the bread and butter of the champion, and any champion immune to armor breaks, will, you know, you're gonna have harder time, but you know, that's perfectly natural. And yeah, I do think Null is great. It's not my favorite type of champion, but that being said, I actually use Null quite often, and that's an alliance quest. Based on what teams I'm running, Null is one of the best options for Path 7 in Section 1 for Map 8, because it's very easy to keep up the 3 debuffs, and, you know, with the combat power rate reduction, you can be super aggressive whilst opponents are not unstoppable, and he just gets the job done. So Null is he's good. You know, I don't think he's as good as Hyperion or Hercules. I don't think he's like the best champion in the game, but I think he's very, very solid, very good champion. And obviously, again, anybody who did Karin Challenge Volume 2, probably, if you had Null, we're very, very happy to have Null, because he did an excellent job in Abyss. Right, moving on to the next one. And in spot number 6, I'm going to put Mr. Negative. And Mr. Negative is one of those champions, again, came out with ShangChi together and got completely overshadowed. As the time goes by, it turns out Mr. Negative is, you know, great matchup for many of the problem fights. Especially if he's awakened, healing from those degenerations and then reducing the degeneration damage makes him so amazing against Mojos, against Ebony Maws, whatever else. He was also quite surprisingly the perfect matchup for Man-Thing in Battlegrounds, like the fastest matchup, to a point where if opponent had like SpiderMan 2099 to deal with like Man-Thing or anything else, and I had Mr. Negative, I was so confident because he's so much faster. And he is a bit of handful to learn. He does have quite a lot of abilities, fairly unique playstyle, things to get used to, definitely requiring fairly skilled player to be able to think on their feet. But at the same time, again, very potent combat power rate reduction. One of my favorite things about Mr. Negative definitely is the fact that in vast majority of the fights, you are able to throw your level 2 before opponent even has a chance to use their first level 1. And that's very important in a ton of fights. Especially if that level 2 is potent enough to nuke them down. And, you know, he does have some slightly underutilized abilities as well, like that regeneration. It's not the most potent one, but it's nice to have there. But the key points definitely is the petrifies, the huge degen, the immunity to nullify, and ability to get rid of all the buffs as well whenever you dash back, that assisted evade / intercept. There's just quite a lot there, and it has taken a while for people to kind of rely and trust this champion a bit, but those who have gained an incredible weapon in meta that seems current, that seems modern, that answers the problems that need to be answered. And yeah, man, I think there is a fairly decent chance that eventually he's going to end up ranking even higher. And he might not necessarily be, you know, your AQ and your day-to-day questing champion, but again, with game modes like Alliance Wars, where like it really matters, he's already putting in a ton of work. With game modes like Battlegrounds, he's one of the best champions there in general. And also, you know, in the harder content, in the, you know, the bigger fights where it does matter, he's amazing. For instance, I know Eternity of Pain's Dormammu, he can absolutely make that fight look like a joke. And besides, he's arguably the best looking champion in the game. I know that that doesn't really factor in these things, but still, it's cool. Right, anyways, let's move on to spot number 5. And spot number 5 is going to be ShangChi. Now, ShangChi has slid down a little bit, and I still think ShangChi is an amazing champion. I do have rank 3. I do use him periodically in Alliance War or in other game modes. He has plenty of utility. He's great. You know, at the moment already, when we are talking about ShangChi, when we're talking about Mr. Negative, Null, Overseer, clearly all of these champions are amazing. Again, just to remind you, all of these are well worth ranking up. And the things that I do like about ShangChi is that he doesn't necessarily rely on any damage or time effects, that he has one of the best cleanse and purify abilities in the game. He is very unique access to slow and stun and unblockable. And then obviously on top of that, there is that mega level 2 that he can do. And yeah, man, he's amazing with or without Liquid Courage Double Edge. Definitely a powerhouse of a champion, without a doubt. Do I think he was maybe slightly overestimated initially? Yeah, perhaps. You know, I generally saw a lot of people who were screaming that he's the best skill champion, stuff like that. Do I think he's the best skill champion? No. Do I think he's, you know, in top 5? Yeah. I do think he's amazing. Top 5, top 6 champion for sure in skill class. And putting in tons of work for tons of players. Favorite champion of many people as well. So there's that. And I completely agree. I think he's crazy good. But moving on to spot number 4. And spot number 4, I know some people are going to say this is too low. Some people are going to say this is too high. SpiderMan 2099, again, is not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. Whereas initially when he came out, he definitely got underestimated a lot by me as well. At the moment, I do think that he's getting overestimated a ton as well by a lot of people. And I'm trying to give him like a fair shake, fair shot. Realistically, he's not, again, everyday kind of blitzkrieg questing champion. He's a specialist, without a doubt. Inability to gain buffs is a very useful ability and enough to make a mediocre champion good. Obviously, that's not the case with SpiderMan, because he does have also very potent power control abilities with his Wither. Now, having that slow one, level 3, again, I'm not the biggest fan. I do think there are many better slow champions, but that slow had proved itself useful in Alliance or boss fights, for instance, when combined with his damage reduction. But in an average fight, when you can't take plenty of hits to the face, it's very pesky to get an access. The resistance up, again, unfortunately, is largely defensive ability. I wish you could be able to build your resistances offensively, then I would kind of think properly. I mean, you can build them up at level 1, but it's just not worth it. And Raptors, I do think everything's perfectly fine with the Raptor mechanic. I do think that also, if you do have AntiVenom synergy, obviously he becomes already a bit different type of beast much quicker. It's kind of like going from unawakened Tigra to awakened Tigra. You know, very different set of fights you can handle in completely different kind of fashion, manner, and speed, most importantly. The problem with SpiderMan is this. His damage isn't awful, but it's far from great. A lot of people like to say that, oh my god, look at that level 2 burst damage and stuff like that. It isn't that high. I think the perfect example with Spider-Man's damage was Battlegrounds. Even going up against rank 4 Spider-Man 2099, when you put him up against somebody like Man-Thing, and you know, it's a perfect matchup for Spider-Man. Because, you know, you don't gain buffs, you don't need to worry about Mystic Dispersion, you don't need to worry about the pustules or poisons or any of that stuff. You just need to fight, hit the Man-Thing as quickly as you can. And also, since Man-Thing does reduce the damage from crits, it's kind of like perfect champion to do as much damage as you can with your Raptures and your bursts of damage, because Man-Thing has nothing against that. So it's virtually as picture-perfect matchup as you can find for Spider-Man 2099. And he was virtually always slower than the opponent, where you often end up, you know, losing your matches in Battlegrounds because of that. Now, I'm not trying to base this entire thing around the Battlegrounds, and obviously, majority of this guy's value, in my opinion, ranges from Alliance War, and then obviously he retains plenty of potential for questing, you know, in harder content and stuff like that. But the point is, I don't think he's that great either, as some people praise him. He's definitely an amazing champion, but he does have his drawbacks. His squishiness is one, unless True Strike is involved, in which case he's immediately the tankiest champion in the game. And the second thing is his damage is somewhat subpar, especially if he's, you know, unawakened or fairly low sig. But all that taken aside, I don't think the damage is everything. I don't think that being somewhat squishy is a deal breaker, and I do think he's a great champion to have. I have mine ranked as well to rank 3. Now, unfortunately, mine's still unawakened. Perhaps that's, you know, disabling me from enjoying him even more. I know a ton of people with rank 4 of this guy, and he's definitely, again, the champion that benefits from that rank 4 a lot, because any increase in damage kind of helps for him. But at the same time, I do feel that people are just unfairly or dishonestly looking past that. Still, amazing champion. Definitely a great addition to the contest, and definitely overlooked initially. Alright, let's move on to the spot number 3. And spot number 3 is going to go to Nimrod. Now, Nimrod's a beast. He was, again, underestimated when he got released. And ever since that, he's been going from strength to strength to strength. Obviously, virtually every mutant, maybe minus Bishop, he just destroys. But here's the thing. He also destroys most of the non-mutants. He really does. I started realizing that, again, coincidentally with Battlegrounds, which is one of the reasons why I love that game mode so much, because it let me practice in a lot of scenarios and do matchups in a lot of scenarios, which I otherwise wouldn't, because you're kind of forced to think out of the box. You're kind of forced to work with that you have. And man, with Nimrod, he just annihilated virtually everybody that he went up against with like a single level 2 or a level 1 or level 2. And I started relying on that with Nimrod offensively, just like as a nuke option, because he definitely outspeeded a ton of quote-unquote most, you know, known damage dealing champions or whatever. It's just an absolute powerhouse. You do not have to have opponent that has, you know, regeneration or prowess. You do not have to go up against a mutant with Nimrod. In plenty of cases, you know, it's just good enough if you get in a couple of parries, activate your level 1 as your modes are about to change in order to get that power gain and energy vulnerability. Get to 10 as you rebuild to level 2, which is super easy with that very potent power gain, and then just nuke everybody down. And he also has obviously plenty of kind of understated utility bits, like his tankiness when you're in your Titan protocol is very hard to kill. Then on top of that, immunity ability accuracy reduction from mutants, awesome. Doesn't care about armor breaks, great. And another thing that I love is his power control whenever opponents throw a special attack. That power drain is very useful. It's not the strongest one, but it lasts for a long time. Where is that? Blitz Protocol. When the opponent launches special attack, inflict power drain, draining 150% of battle power over 15 seconds. So for 15 seconds, the power is getting consistently drained, so you don't have to worry about pushing them to level 3, and you can just go ham with Nimrod. Now, the more time goes, the more I love this guy. I do have him at rank 4, Sig 200. The dude is just a maniac. Another thing that lets him kind of unlock this second level of power is the Sig ability. His Sig ability is somewhat underrated. It might not sound like it's too important, because you increase the potency and duration of special attack effects by 10 to 35%. But the kick is that you increase the duration and potency. So for instance, your energy vulnerability not only lasts longer, but it reduces their energy resistance even further. Thus you get more time to do even more damage, and it all kind of squares up, you know, it adds a lot. Similarly, you're energized. Not only that energized lasts longer, but every hit gives you more power. So the difference is quite big for when you're using him at low Sig to high Sig. But yeah, absolutely love this guy, man. He's a monster. Kind of wish he was the top champion, because he's definitely, I think, my favorite one of the, or one of the favorites here. Right, spot number 2. I don't have to say too much. It's Kitty Pryde. A lot of people are going to say it's going to be spot number 1. I think it's going to be, again, one of those eternal discussions. Hercules or Kitty Pryde, or Ghost and Kitty Pryde, who's better? Kitty's crazy good, without a doubt. She is, and she's proving that. At the same time, you know, there are limitations to the character, you know, and we can see that. Kitty is one of those champions that can do virtually anything in the game, but it also does involve risk, and things can go wrong very, very easily. If you do make some sort of mistake, she actually has one of the 20 smallest health pools in the game, so she is quite squishy when you do mess up. And then when it happens, it goes from, you know, 100 to 0 very quickly. At the same time, the potential for this champion is insane. You do have to be fairly adept. You do need to know what you're doing. But, man, they did make something special with Kitty. Obviously, Incinerate immunity is nice, but the entire key of the champion virtually is the phasing. It does have a long ability description, but in reality, what you need to know about Kitty, you know, dash forward with 3 or more prowess, you're phasing. Whilst you're phasing, you're basically immune to everything, you take no damage, and that's what you kind of need to know. That's where her utility comes. And applications are endless, and whilst Kitty exists in her current format in the game, she's always going to be one of the best champions in the game. There's just no question about it. Because again, it's a very simple ability, just like Quake, just like Ghost, that has virtually endless applications. Crazy good champion. And again, the only reason I don't think she's first, the only reason why I don't think she's the top champion, is because there is still a fairly high percentage of that 100 to 0 scenario. When you dash in, you need to be very careful, very much always on point to make sure that your phasing does trigger, for instance. If opponent's slightly too close, you're not going to trigger the phase. You're going to think you trigger, you're going to get hit in the face. And also, obviously, you can tank the level 3s, but the fact that you need to dash forward, and then if opponent doesn't throw the level 3, you need to dash backwards and manage to dash forwards, it doesn't give you that guaranteed ability to tank those level 3s, for instance. Quite often, you just kind of be out of that phase. It's, you know, slight luck involved with all of those elements. And she's always going to be a great champion, without a doubt. But I don't think there's anything she can do about that. Where, you know, there will be definitely fights that you lose just because, oh, your phase didn't trigger because you weren't far enough from your opponent, or, again, the phase just expired and then you get hit in the face with a special attack. Things like that. And one could say those are user errors, and to a degree you can mitigate them, but only so far. There will always be that element of luck and RNG involved with Kitty, which is something that, you know, definitely holds back the champion slightly. At the same time, obviously, absolutely amazing champion. Might be my first mutant rank 4, because I do think that top potential there is crazy. Right, and the top champion, without any surprise, is still going to be Hercules. And a lot of people are wondering even, like, why is Hercules so good? Why does everybody love Hercules so much? And it's very simple, because Hercules is arguably the easiest champion to land your potential in the game. Yeah, he doesn't have 50 immunities. He can't, power control the opponents. He can't, bypass everything and stuff like that. And on paper, for instance, you can make definitely a good argument that Kitty is the better champion, because there's wider application of that ability. Kind of, because Immortality, I would argue, possibly has the widest application in the game. But the thing with Hercules is, he works everywhere. And why he works everywhere is because he's very simple to get the desired result out of. What do you do with Hercules? You do damage and you finish fights. At the same time, your ability to bypass auto block and evades obviously help you be aggressive, finish fights quickly. At the same time, that entire Immortality combined with Unblockable, again, can give you unprecedented levels of aggression and ability not to give a shit about what opponent does, aside from eating a level 3. You can, literally run with Hercules in opponent's level 2 face first and be perfectly fine. Everything according to the game plan, right? And then, you do have those additional utility bits, the fact that he can access plenty of buffs, but doesn't necessarily super rely on them. The fact that he slightly heals of Liquid Courage Double Edge is nice. The fact that his level 2 has a guaranteed stun has proved to be source of plenty of cheese methods. His immunity to stun is fairly rare and definitely still extremely useful, so on and so forth. Obviously, ability to have basically half of his damage be dealt via bursts of physical damage. Again, that can serve as additional bits of utility. And again, the end result is very, very simple, very, very utilitarian. What Hercules does is kind of what Corvus does these days, just, arguably better. Because he has bigger reach. He can do more damage within the time that Immortality would expire, because if you are aggressive, you can keep it up for a very long time. And you do not need to kind of like slow play, be super careful whilst you're immortal. You can just go full speed ahead. And that's the thing with Hercules. You don't often need to read the nodes. You don't care what damage you take because you're immortal. You don't care what opponent's going to do. The only thing that you kind of care about opponent is whether they have evade. That's quite literally it. You don't care about auto blocks because of your true sense and because of your unblockability. You don't care about miss mechanics, because again of your true sense, and you can bypass that. And then you don't care about any damage back dealt to him and stuff like that, because you're just running guns blazing. So yeah, I do think Hercules is an amazing champion. Kind of busted, kind of slightly game wrecking, or let me put it like this: I think Hercules is the upper peak limit with Kitty as well, perhaps, that can be added in this game without having me actively campaigning for a nerf. If they made Hercules any better than he is right now, I'd probably be saying, it's like, okay, let us play with him around a little bit, but you're probably gonna have to nerf him, because he is genuinely on that border of game-alteringly busted. Especially when you have him at highest rank level, especially when you're running Liquid Courage Double Edge, perhaps putting up some boost or something. The man is just a monster. Anyways, so that's it. Quite a long video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And that is going to be it for this one. So again, don't forget that there are going to be next ones coming. So tomorrow we're going to be doing, tomorrow or Monday, tomorrow or Sunday, we'll see. We're going to be doing all the individual class rankings from weakest to strongest, and then we're going to carry on with the top 10s in those classes. Again, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'm going to catch you guys later. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the next